Ladies, today's episode is near and dear to my heart because it's something that I have dealt with, which, oh gosh, now probably 18 years now I've been dealing with this. I am very happy to be joined by the amazing Joanne Kennedy, a leading expert in naturopathic medicine specializing in the MTHFR, methylation, and histamine intolerance, which is my connection to this. Joanne has built an incredible practice in Sydney, Australia, helping patients worldwide through her online consultations and programs. She's also a passionate educator, guiding practitioners in understanding the complexities of histamine and the female hormonal system. In this episode, we are going to dive deep into histamine intolerance, its connection to hormone imbalances, and how it impacts everything from gut health to perimenopause. And we'll explore genetics, like the MTHFR mutations, which is always this elusive, like, do you got the Mither mutation? And everybody, nobody really understands it, myself included sometimes. And just how this condition can tie into many hormonal problems. And so when I came across Joanne actually emailed me, and I was telling her before we started, I was like, I ignore 99% of the emails I get with people, pitching me to come on this podcast. But when I saw that Joanne specialized in histamine and the hormonal system, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, please come on this podcast. So super excited. You can find Joanne at Joanne Kennedy Naturopathy at .com, and I will link to that in the show notes and where you can find her on Instagram. So welcome, Joanne. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thank you, Karen. It's an absolute pleasure to be on your podcast. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and we just prior to us starting the recording, we have been sitting here chatting for an hour. So we have a lot in common. We have a lot of connection, her and I. And so it's like we're already friends. We're here talking as friends. And what's cool is we're the same age. So you are 48,
Yes.
you are also going through perimenopause. And so you know all too well about this transition in life for women and the difficulties that we can be facing. And histamine intolerance is something that needs to start being recognized and considered with some of our symptoms that we experience. So, but before we go there, let's give a general overview of this whole histamine stuff. What is histamine and how does it affect our body?
Okay, great question. The histamine is actually part of our biochemistry. It's part of our body. Okay, so it's a biogenic amine. Biogenic means that it's made by all living organisms, including plants and humans. And an amine means that it's made from an amino acid, which is
Okay.
histidine. Okay, that's sort of the basic science of it. Histamine has really important roles in the body. Okay, so it's a vital part of our immune system. Okay, so when we get a bacterial infection, a virus, even like a cut, any kind of trauma to our body, it causes an inflammation cascade, which is normal, healthy. We would die if we didn't have one. And what happens with that inflammation cascade is histamine is released, and histamine's role is to vasodilate blood vessels, so widen capillaries. That allows for white blood cells and platelets to go in and heal and repair and fight off the virus or the bacteria. So it's super important in our immune system. Okay, it's also involved in contraction of smooth muscle in the bronchi, so it's important for breathing. Okay, it stimulates hydrochloric acid secretion. So this is really
Yeah, that's
important clinically.
crazy.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
I
the
didn't know
crazy. This is
this
when
until I read your
yeah,
book.
this is when we start seeing symptoms. So it actually stimulates the release of hydrochloric acid, stomach acid. It stimulates the release of estrogen from the ovaries.
Yeah,
Crazy.
that's
It's involved
yes.
in labor. It's contraction of
What?
smooth muscle in labor. Okay. It is also a neurotransmitter. which
Yeah,
is
that blew
crazy.
my mind, Joanne. When I read that, I was like, no, how,
Yeah,
what?
yeah,
It's a neurotransmitter.
yeah.
It's got such a bad name because we've been hearing about this histamine intolerance and this is so bad and histamine's bad. That's
Mm,
what kind of surrounds it for the last couple of years, at least in my world.
yeah,
So this is so positive what you're talking about with histamine. And
yeah. We
then it's a
need histamine.
neurotransmitter. Like we need this.
Yeah, it actually stimulates the release of serotonin and dopamine, and it's involved in the sleep-wake cycle. It's important for learning and memory. Okay, so like anything, it's the balance.
Mhm.
Like estrogen and like
Mhm.
hormones, it's the
Mhm.
balance. So we need histamine, but we need to be able to clear it. And and we'll talk about this, there's so many things that can increase histamine in your body. And if you can't detoxify it or break it down properly, then you'll have symptoms
Mhm.
and it plays havoc with estrogen. Havoc.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's the thing with histamine is it's a useful part of our human body, but we can have too much of it. And then the whole thing with histamine intolerance, like what is it really? In my mind, it's just the body's making more histamine than it can break down. And then the interesting thing is there's a lot of foods that are high in histamine.
Mhm.
Okay, because as I said, histamine's made by all living organisms, animals, plants, everyone, humans, right? So there are some foods that are really high in histamine. So when we consume them, if our histamine bucket is already too high, we will have an adverse reaction to those foods, which is, I think, where the term sort of histamine intolerance kind of lies as well, because people will recognize that they're intolerant to those foods.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, it's important to know that because just removing histamine foods from your diet is not going to fix why you have a histamine issue.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
it can help reduce symptoms that it won't fix the underlying problem.
So it's really
Yeah.
not the correct terminology for it. Like we're not intolerant to the histamine.
No, exactly. It's very, very true. And it is a term that, I mean, I use for ease of conversation with people and to get the message out there. But it's
Hmm.
essentially our body, it's a vital part of the human body and we need it. And if we've got too much of it, if we're having the symptoms, which I'll talk about, or we're reacting to high histamine foods, then that's a red flag that there's something out of balance, something deeper in the body that we need to investigate and fix.
Hmm.
Okay, because in the
Is
majority of cases, we can get on top of histamine issues.
I was explained about his when I first learned about histamine intolerance, it was explained to me as the we have a cup that every time we eat certain foods or certain things that happen in the body, we release histamine and that cup starts to fill up. And so you may not react until it gets to the point that it's overflowing with histamine, then we will react. But my personal experience with histamine, and maybe it's not histamine intolerance, but my personal experience with it was never that. It was always just specific foods that I have a histamine reaction to. And it's all the
Hmm.
foods that are high in histamine, like many of the foods that are high in histamine, but it didn't act like that cup overflowing. It's like
Hmm.
every time I eat an avocado, I break out in hives 2 days
Hmm.
later.
Hmm.
But I can eat leftovers. I can eat, you know, certain meats that are like the dried
Hmm.
meats and things like that, which have been always been told is these are really high in histamine, and then there's certain citrus fruits that are
Hmm.
high in histamine that I react to, but other ones I don't.
Mm.
And then, so does
Yeah.
that make
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And so you fit into the more tricky, well, I don't know. It's more you with histamine, right?
Mhm.
There are many cells that release histamine, not just mast cells. Okay,
Okay.
so we have keratinocytes on the skin, smooth muscle cells in the gut, endothelial cells. They will create histamine on the spot under duress from inflammation. And there's
Okay.
many causes of that. Gluten, SIBO, oxalates, right? And then what happens is your cup will start building up over time. Then we also have the immune system, whereby mast cells will mast cells contain antigens, sorry. So antibodies. Mast cells contain antibodies. If you have an antigen, what your body recognizes as a toxin, enter your body, and you have an antibody against that toxin. So your body can actually make an antigen against avocado, right? It sees it. There's something in your immune system that has decided that it is reactive to that, and it will degranulate and release histamine from mast cells really quickly, causing the more of the the hives or itchy throat, itchy eyes, ears, puffy face, or even in an extreme case, it can cause anaphylaxis.
Anaphylaxis, right.
So it's a bit complex. It's just that's frustrating, Karen. That part of the histamine picture is annoying because it's um your body is recognizing a food as a toxin
Okay.
and it's
So it's
degranulating the mast cells.
okay, so it's more of a mast cell, which what are mast cells? Is there an
So
easy way to explain that?
mast cells are immune cells,
Okay.
and um they contain many inflammatory mediators. Okay, so they release inflammatory mediators when stimulated from something that the body recognizes as a toxin, such as mold,
Mhm.
mycotoxins, okay, or heavy metal, something like that, or pollen and fauna and flora, say, or animal fur, right? An environmental, and it can be food. It recognizes that as a toxin and it creates an antibody. Okay. And when that toxin connects to that antibody, it releases histamine really fast. And
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, I got it. Okay. I
And
think
then it
the
does, and
puzzle
it does
pieces
this
are coming
other,
together.
and it does this other thing called differential release, whereby it will release histamine slowly. And these mast cells release other inflammatory mediators. They're all like substance P and all these complex words and stuff, right? But it will release histamine slowly over time. Okay. And there are like viruses, bacteria, like COVID, definitely. Um, and most things that cause inflammation in the body will stimulate these mast cells to release histamine over time, slowly up to 72 hours.
This is what's happening. That makes so much sense. Thank you. You're the first person to explain this properly.
Yeah. Yeah. So mold is interesting. Mold will do both.
Hmm.
Mold can act as like stimulate like more of sort of like an anaphylactic kind of reaction,
Hmm.
or it can do differential release, which is a slow release. Mast cell activation syndrome from mold is mainly a differential release like over a long period of time. This is why things get really chronic.
Okay.
And people don't know what is causing it.
Yeah.
When you know it's avocado, bang.
Right.
Okay, so the immunoglobulin that you would be producing would be an IgG or something like that because it's not anaphylactic. If it's
Hmm.
IgE, it would be anaphylaxis. Does that make sense?
So it's a food sensitivity, and we're
It's a food
releasing the mast
sensitivity.
cells, recognizing it as a foreign thing that should not be
Yes.
there. So it's going, we need to attack this. It
Yeah.
can take up to 72 hours for that attack to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
then your body goes, this is how it's going to represent itself, which for me is obviously the rashes
Yeah.
and migraines for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. There's
Okay.
also, this is the
Because there's a huge
crazy.
thing with migraines, right?
That's right, because this is the thing. Mast cells contain estrogen receptors, and estrogen stimulates the release of histamine from mast cells. God is a man. I've always said that. Honestly, you can't believe this stuff. I just can't. I can't believe it. Then also, the other crazy thing is estrogen will upregulate that antibody antigen allergen response, which is why a lot of women go, oh, my hay fever's worse at ovulation, or perimenopause when my estrogen's high but compared to my progesterone, they get a lot more allergy symptoms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like they can get a lot more sneezing or runny nose, or they're more reactive to the dog, they're more reactive to the flowers, they're more reactive to changes in temperature. It's because estrogen upregulates that antibody antigen response.
Why do you think? Like, I mean, God or whomever doesn't do anything by mistake.
I know.
So is this a case
I
of
think
it's
it's
being
just
too much? Like we've got all these xenoestrogens and things that are acting like estrogen.
mm,
So we're es estrogen overloaded when you look at the whole estrogen bucket.
mm,
But if we were normal hunter-gatherers without all
yeah, of
these influences,
course.
what was the purpose of this interaction between histamine and estrogen? There's got to be a positive reason.
Well, understand the positive reason of why. See, histamine stimulates estrogen. It stimulates the release of estrogen from the ovaries. And that is normal because it
Mhm.
supports healthy follicle growth and ovulation, etc. But then why we have histamine mast cells and histaminergic neurons, so nerve cells in the brain also contain histamine receptors. Sorry, histamine estrogen receptors. I don't know why. It's not
Like,
honestly,
could it
don't
be
know.
that
It
it's
would
like
in
this circle kind of back and forth, like histamine's going to help us make estrogen, but estrogen's going to help us make histamine, which then helps us make more estrogen.
I mean, I just don't know because I don't it's not actually helpful. I I just think the main thing is that I mean, I don't know what was going on with histamine issues in Paleolithic times. I just have no idea.
Hmm.
So, but all I can say is that the women have really complex immune systems as part of our, you know, to protect ourselves from having unwanted babies and unhealthy babies. So I
Right.
really don't know the answer to why that is the case.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because
because it only
estrogen's
just causes,
also important to support the immune system.
yeah. But I
Hmm.
don't know why we have such histamine problems. Why God, I have to say God, why God
Yeah.
did this.
Right. Right. I
Because
always
I
try to
just
go
think it's
back
cruel.
to,
I just think it's cruel.
yeah.
And most women in perimenopause, whether you've had pre-existing histamine issues or not, will start to get some histamine symptoms. Most.
Right. Interesting. Well, I'm going to have to look into that more because I always want to know what
Yeah.
was the purpose of this.
Yeah. There's, you know
Because
what? There's very,
Mother Nature doesn't
very,
do anything by accident.
the problem here is there's very limited research.
Yes. Yeah.
I
It
found it.
really
I
is.
found I don't know, there's like 5 papers or something.
Oh,
There's very
wow.
limited, there's limited research. But clinically, I promise everyone, day in, day out, my colleagues and I see it all the time. Like it is
So,
extremely common. Yeah.
wow. Tell us some of the symptoms then. You guys have all heard my symptoms. So, mine are I get very severe migraines. I have uh, food sensitivities to all very high histamine foods like avocado, chocolate, citrus fruits, things like this, which are very well known histamine containing foods. My whole family has it. All of my sisters and my mother
Wow.
all have severe histamine, which I'm also going to ask you about the genetic piece in this. But
Mm.
what else do you see clinically, of course, as far as the hormonal system goes and symptoms, but also just general symptoms of
Hmm.
what somebody could be experiencing that could be from a
Yeah.
histamine intolerance?
Okay. I'll start with all the histamine symptoms and all the different systems, and
Hmm.
then explain how it interacts with hormones.
Hmm.
Okay. So in the respiratory tract, we can get runny nose, sinusitis, itchy ears, nose, throat. Um, we can get reflux, chronic reflux, and heartburn. This people listen to this, it is so often a histamine problem because histamine stimulates that H2 receptor. and it releases hydrochloric acid, stimulates hydrochloric acid, but not when you're chewing a steak at random times, really. And that's
Oh,
why we look at the drugs, the H2 blockers. It's really interesting looking at pharmacology and looking at what the drugs and what they're doing to all the different, we've got several different histamine receptors. Um, it will cause in the gut, it can cause burning pain, it can cause bloating, it can cause nausea, it can cause loose stools. It can also cause frequent stools. So some people say to me, I poop 8 times a day. That's great. I'm like, no, it's not. And it's actually
no, it's not. Sorry to burst your bubble.
it's crazy. My colleague Melanie and I, like, sometimes we're like, it's histamine. It's just like it's histamine. Yeah, it's histamine. Really interesting. Um, Skin, it causes hives. It causes a big component of eczema, contributes to rosacea. Rosacea is often a SIBO issue, but also rosacea, acne. We
Hmm.
have sebaceous glands that release the sebum, which causes acne, have histamine receptors. Really, really big deal. Clinically, you'll see like it's not just high testosterone and PCOS kind of picture for acne. It's often high histamine. Okay, can cause
Okay.
acne. Um, it can cause heart palpitations, shortness of breath, high blood pressure. It can cause headaches. This is a spectrum, headaches to migraines, that
Yeah.
spectrum, dizziness right through to vertigo. Okay, so motion sickness. So I get car sick is a big histamine symptom. Yeah, it causes anxiety, depression, insomnia, and an inability to regulate your body temperature. Okay, I think I've gone through all the systems in my head.
Just before I forget, what about hyperemesis gravidarum?
Oh, morning sickness. Yes, severe morning
Mhm.
sickness. I think so.
Severe morning sickness.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that's,
Yes,
I
yes,
bet you
yes,
that's a
yes.
freaking histamine thing.
Yes, yes, yes.
Huh.
The Dow enzyme that breaks down histamine increases like 500% in pregnancy. So if there's issues with that, genetic potentially, or if
Yes.
your estrogen's just out of super high, well, it has to be high in pregnancy. I think there's definitely a histamine component.
Yeah.
It contracts smooth muscle of the uterus, so it absolutely causes period pain. One of the causes of period pain. Yeah. Um, then, so I think I've gone through all the
Hmm.
symptoms.
Hmm.
Um, and then what it does with women's hormones is because estrogen increases histamine and histamine increases estrogen, it's a really vicious circle that goes around and around. So if you have any of these symptoms that I just mentioned, they can absolutely get worse at ovulation when estrogen's high and then before your period. When your progesterone drops and is you got unopposed estrogen. So
Okay.
reflux, skin issues, acne, eczema, chronic reflux, loose stools, anxiety, depression, all of that. I understand anxiety, depression is multifactorial with hormones, but
Hmm.
I have some sort of clinical ways of working out what I think it is.
Yeah.
So headaches, migraines at ovulation, classic histamine symptom. Okay. And then before menstruation. So it causes definitely can cause PMS because high estrogen increases. Estrogen stimulates histamine release in the brain. When you've got high histamine in the brain, the body's like, oh, we're going to send a message to the adrenals to release adrenaline, cause anxiety and insomnia and heart
Yeah.
palpitations. Okay. And then at the same time, when your estrogen's like much higher, and then because histamine increases estrogen and your estrogen's getting higher and higher and higher, and your progesterone's just not adequate to deal with that, then you're going to have like relative estrogen dominance, low progesterone, anxiety, sort of anxiety picture as well. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
is it
Yeah.
just low progesterone? But if any woman has any of these histamine symptoms, and she's estrogen dominant, then I would be definitely looking at reducing her histamines to help with those symptoms.
Right. And then does any of the other hormones like progesterone or testosterone or anything help to break histamine down?
Yeah, yeah. So what estrogen also does, just to let you know, is estrogen downregulates the Dow enzyme, which is just not fair. So the Dow enzyme breaks down histamine outside of the cell, like really clinically, we think about this in the gut. It breaks down histamine in the gut. Estrogen reduces Dow enzyme synthesis. Progesterone increases Dow enzyme.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh, this is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Increases DAO enzyme. It also, so it, you know how is progesterone just buffer, it helps reduce any adverse impact of estrogen broadly. It will also reduce, it's also down regulates that hyperimmune response that you can get with antibody antigen release of histamine stimulating mast cells that estrogen causes. Progesterone can reduce that. So it's
Wow.
very helpful for buffering that, just reducing the impact that estrogen can have on histamine.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yes.
And are we, when we say estrogen, are you very specifically meaning estradiol or a
I,
combination of the three
well,
estrogens?
that would be something I'd need to learn. We'd have to work out together. I know because I work predominantly with menstruating women, it's estradiol.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. It's estradiol.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's what's made in the ovaries. Yeah.
Yeah. So all I can tell you is that I don't deal with fertility and pregnancy.
Hmm.
So I'm not really sure. And then post menopause, most women are good.
Like their histamine intolerance subsides.
Yes. If it's the hormonal component of the histamine issues
Okay.
can get a lot better,
Right. Right.
definitely. However, women who are super high histamine because of mold or oxalates or SIBO or anything like that, they can sometimes not take HRT. They can't take estrogen.
What
So
happens
this
if
is
they do?
awful for women with mast. So mast cell activation syndrome is essentially when your mast cells, this is more of a severe presentation where something's really triggered your mast cells to degranulate and really be problematic. Like mold is classic. Lyme disease will do it, mold illness. A lot of these women, they cannot take estrogen. If they do have to take it because they're so depressed without it, they have to take mast cell stabilizing drugs at the same time. It's a real problem, which is why I always coach my patients that come to me in perimenopause with pre-existing histamine issues. Like, you need to get this under control now, because if you need to take hormones when you're post-menopause, you might not do well on them.
Because it'll just continue activating their
Yes.
histamine
Yes. So for
responses.
sure, HRT estrogen increases histamine, definitely.
Right. Right.
I'm not sure about all the different types, but what I've seen people, I'm not, yeah, so you know more about that than me, but definitely synthetic estrogens that people are taking in HRT will increase histamine in some people. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it hasn't, for me, if anything, it's gotten better. So that would kind of say that I'm not, because the mast cell activation syndrome is different than just mast cell, or is it?
It's different.
It's
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
It's a mast activation syndrome. It's just okay. People come to me being diagnosed with MCAS, and I'm like,
Mm,
yeah, but it's mold. Because I don't see Lyme disease. Okay, so what
okay.
causes MCAS is Lyme disease. I just don't see Lyme. We don't have it in Australia. We do, but it's just not recognized. Don't see
Okay.
Lyme. I know it's big in the US. Heavy metal like severe heavy metal toxicity. I don't really see that clinically. It can be caused from like spider bites and stuff like that. And then there's mold, which is common, and I see it all the time. So the mold can cause, if the mold is not dealt with, if you are allergic to mold, if you have genetic SNPs where you can't detoxify mold properly, if you're in a lot of mold, if mold's a big problem for you and you haven't dealt with it, then it can just cause the mast cells to just be hyper reactive,
Okay.
and it's very
Yes.
hard to calm them down. It's just the immune system's going berserk. It goes berserk.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when people
So
have my MCAS, I'm like, is it
mm,
mold? We need to say you've got mold
figure it out.
and
Yeah.
and figure out mold. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you talk so much about getting to the root of this stuff, which is what we're talking. Like you're talking about all these different causes and about it's not just about, oh, let's just remove histamine high foods, which is what you see everywhere. It's just like follow, and all the lists
Mm.
are different. So it's very
Mm-hmm.
confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be quite the task trying to remove high histamine foods and all of them. And you're like, really? Like, what am I left to eat here? Uh, And your thing is yeah, like that could help with some of the symptoms, but what we typically see, same within mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerant patients, is people will start removing these high histamine foods. They feel better for a period of time. And then they start reacting and they're like, but I'm not eating high histamine foods. Why am I getting hives? And then they go, okay, well, I better take out more foods.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, they feel better for a while. Now we got to take more. And it just is this horrible
Mm.
thing. And then I've read blogs on people that have had mast cell activation where they're like, I was down to eating chickpeas. That
Yeah.
is it. And it's
Yeah.
like, this is not the answer.
No, it's not the answer at all.
It's not the answer.
So, so basically, a few things that can happen. Um, I'm just going to talk about SIBO,
Mm-hmm.
small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So you get an overgrowth of bacteria in the small bowel. Okay, so it when you eat foods high in FODMAPs and resistant starch, those bacteria convert those foods into gas. The gas causes bloating and inflammation, and it releases histamine. Okay, if that goes on long enough, what also happens is the inflammation in the small intestine will reduce the synthesis and excretion of the DAO enzyme that breaks down histamine. So the net result is more histamine. Okay, so you can remove histamine foods from your diet, and your body's like, ah, okay, that's nice. And then inevitably, potentially, you start eating more FODMAPs, or you start eating more resistant starch. You potentially are eating more high FODMAPs, potentially, right? And then what happens is you are also going to start getting histamine reactions to FODMAPs and resistant starch.
Wow.
It's often like the body's complex. Off that can be the case, or literally the body's like, right, I've dealt with the histamines under control, and now I'm going to start trying. Like I'm going to start. The immune system's so complex. It's like, wow, no, you're still doing the thing that's causing the histamine.
Yeah,
It gives us
yeah,
messages. I know that's not very scientific, but it gives us messages. It's like you're
yeah.
still doing the thing. Okay. The other thing is digestive enzymes are so fundamental, like hydrochloric acid. So if you do not have adequate hydrochloric acid, you cannot break down your food properly, particular animal protein. It will sit, rot, ferment in the gut. Okay. And then release histamine. So it's not also like, and stress is the biggest cause of low HCl. It's really stress. Well, stress causes so much of this gut stuff, right?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
so if you're low in hydrochloric acid, then you're going to end up with SIBO also, and you can't break down your food properly. So
mm-hmm,
this is the thing. People are changing their diets, adding new things in, taking things out, and it becomes complex for them, I understand. But there's
mm-hmm,
also, you've got to ask your patients, what are you doing now that you weren't doing before as well?
mm-hmm,
Another classic thing that happens, people go gluten-free. And what they replace the gluten products with is rice flour and tapioca flour and corn flour, super high starch, and it absolutely feeds SIBO.
yeah,
So they end up with SIBO.
yeah.
Or they decide they're going to go on a plant-based diet and they're not eating enough animal protein, they're not getting enough hydrochloric acid. They are feeding their SIBO bacteria with legumes, high FODMAP, high resistant starch, both, and then bang. Like the little bits of SIBO bacteria that were okay are now like thriving.
Mm-hmm,
Another thing that can happen is people are like, I am not going to eat grains. I'm going to have everything with almond meal, almond flour, almond meal, everything. And that's
yep.
super high. That's super high oxalate. Oxalate's a whole thing, right? We'll talk about that, but they're really high in oxalate, which will cause havoc with histamine. So there's a lot of things that you can do that you think are right that are causing massive problems with histamine. Yeah. But
Yeah.
if
And I'm going
anyone,
to add to that, which
yeah.
is, so let's use gluten as an example where you take out the gluten and you replace it with gluten-free products made with gluten-free grains. But if you have a leaky gut, which means you're having an immune response in your body, you have inflammation, you've got leaky gut.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, removing gluten can make you feel better for a while, but grains, there's this genetic mimicry, for instance, that the grains, even if they're gluten free, have a genetic makeup so close to gluten that your body, because it's in this immune response and you haven't healed your gut,
Mm-hmm.
it starts a immune response,
Definitely.
histamine response, to
Definitely.
all of these gluten-free grains
Yeah,
as though it
that's
was
right.
gluten.
That's 100%. So grains are really problematic for the immune system
Hmm.
generally, and will also cause havoc with histamine. And then other things like, you know, if you have SIBO and you not, if you, the thing with SIBO is it takes FODMAP foods, which are really prebiotic. They feed the beneficial bacteria in the large intestine, create short chain fatty acids, which are a fuel source to repair and heal the gut consistently. That's going to cause, like that dysbiotic picture can cause leaky gut. And then you've also got oxalates cause havoc. There's sharp crystals, they are going to deposit into the gut and cause havoc with the gut. The problem with oxalates, they also deplete your sulfur, and you need sulfur to create
Sulfate.
the mucus
Yeah.
so much, and the mucus layer in the gut and protect the
Right.
gut. So there's many things that can be causing leaky gut, and then food molecules will get through into the bloodstream and cause havoc with histamine. Guts are big. We know when we're dealing with histamine, gut is a big deal. We really need to make
Yeah.
sure we're getting the gut stuff right.
Yeah.
Um, the only time I find reducing histamines in the diet is just when women are like late perimenopause and they're just really they're just really struggling with their progesterone and high estrogen, and until we get them into the doctor to get the HRT and in to do the thing. And sometimes that can take like 2 months. They got to do the test, they got to see the doctor. Maybe there's 2 months before they get their hormones. Reducing histamines in the diet can help them sleep, stop their anxiety, and calm them down. Right. So I do
Wow.
use that clinically just to help. And the women are like, I don't care, just help. And
Right, right.
they'll feel better.
Yeah, yeah.
But
So
you
gut
you've got to treat
infections
the
is
you got to,
huge.
yeah. Beg your pardon?
Sorry, gut infections are huge. And would you say it's like the number one thing that you see causing the histamine
Yeah,
issues?
definitely. Yeah, definitely. Just because of the like it's going to be digestive enzyme insufficiency, gallbladder problems, because if you don't have
Okay.
adequate bile acids, you bile acids are antimicrobial. They cause problems with SIBO. They cause problems with digestion, right? So pancreatic enzyme insufficiency, bile acid insufficiency, hydrochloric acid insufficiency, Helicobacter pylori also releases histamine.
H. pylori, what
Yeah,
people
yeah,
know it
H.
as. Yeah,
pylori.
yeah, yeah.
SIBO, candida,
Okay.
oxalates, mold causes havoc in the gut. Mold, destroys the microbiome. Um, constipation. You're just not poo. I have so many people come to me and it's like you think it's SIBO, but it's not. They're just so constipated and they're not pooping out their undigested food and bad bacteria. And they also might have low digestive enzymes. So it's
Mhm.
just like top to tail, they're not breaking down their food properly, and it's sitting, rotting, fermenting, releasing a lot of histamine, and they're not pooping it out. That's, stuff like that. It's
And
like
then they're
people come to me
recirculating their
going,
estrogen and
and
estrogen's
then
going up.
and then the
So it's
estrogen
like,
picture. Yeah, and then
oh
we
my
got the big
God.
estrogen mess as well. Um, I had a woman she found me. This is people find me all over the world. She's in Baghdad. She found me on YouTube or whatever with massive histamine issues. She's done organic acids because she's listened to my stuff. She's done all the testing, Dutch hormones,
Mhm.
organic acids, thought about mold, SIBO, everything. She doesn't have any of that. She's just chronically constipated. And she's a woman, right, with estrogen. She has every single histamine symptom. It's just constipation. So that's a big thing that we need to think about as well. Like you got to get your bowels moving.
Mhm.
Yeah. So look, that it's the other thing with mold is so prevalent. It's everywhere. It makes people so sick. It's not well understood. I'm like the mold whisperer. I just pick it up in patients all the time now. And
Mhm.
it's like a process of elimination for me. Well, it's
Yeah.
about exposure. Some people just know. And they often have quite severe presentation of symptoms, and will cause massive histamine problems. Yeah.
Wow. It's such a problem, I find. I've been doing a lot of traveling to Florida, and we were thinking about moving to Florida, my family and I. And it's so interesting, like how many friends I have that have lived in Florida at some point they all have mold. They're
Yeah.
like, I'm riddled with mold.
Yeah.
It's
Florida's
it's
bad.
it's like you can't
Yeah.
escape it.
Yeah. And
Texas,
a lot of the Pacific Northwest, so Washington and Portland, Oregon. I get a lot of
right.
patients. I get a lot of patients from there.
Yeah.
Sydney is really bad with mold too. It's really everywhere, but it's also like even in the Middle East where it's dry, it's in the air conditioning. Yeah, so it's a big problem.
Wow.
Um, so one thing I want to talk about is what I've now found a massive correlation with neurological histamine symptoms. So the headaches and migraines and vertigo in particular is what's called MARCoNS. So MARCoNS are multiple antibiotic resistant staphylococci that grow in the nose and they release a lot of histamine. People with MARCoNS, 80% of them have had mold problems because what happens with mold, it reduces a hormone called melanocyte stimulating hormone. Like, what is that? It can reduce the mucosal layer in the nose and the gut, whereby that mucus isn't able to trap and expel the pathogens. And so they build up. And these staph are very biofilm creating. And they also, in turn, reduce that MSH enzyme. So you've got a labyrinth in there, and all of these bacteria and mold mycotoxins and fungus and everything building up, releasing a lot of histamine into the brain.
Mm.
So when there's neurological histamine issues, even if someone's like, oh, Joe, my nose is a bit snuffy or a bit blocked or a bit runny, I'm like, you got to test for MARCoNS.
Hmm.
And so often it comes back positive. Yeah.
And so what are the symptoms then in the brain then?
Um, Usually it's going to be dizziness, right through to full-blown vertigo, motion sickness, absolutely headaches and migraines.
Hmm.
Absolutely headaches, migraines. Yeah. So this is something I learned about a couple of years ago. And since when I learned about it, I started testing. It changed the way I treat neurological histamine issues. Yes, there's a gut-brain axis issue and all of that, but
Hmm.
it's not everyone was getting amazing results. Like not everyone was getting 100% clearing of their neurological histamine issues just by doing gut stuff and
Okay.
hormone clearing. So it's definitely a big thing. So I would be testing that first now.
The MARCoNS.
Hmm.
Really? I
Yeah.
never like I didn't quite understand the MARCoNS when I was speaking down in Florida last year at the clinic that I spoke at. It's a functional clinic and they test MARCoNS all the time. And they deal with
Mm-hmm.
people with Lyme, like chronic illness stuff, mold. And my friend, Danielle Hamilton, uh, she tested for the MARCoNS because she had had this like nasal drip and itchy throat. And the lady was like, "You've got MARCoNS." And she's like, "Let's
Hmm.
check." Sure enough, came back positive.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting because she started using their nasal spray, which was like had all this stuff like glutathione and had like oregano oil and like things that it was a little burny. I remember her
Yeah.
saying it
Yeah.
burnt a little bit, but she did it and she stayed consistent with it. And what was interesting, her body started to release weight.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow. That's
And
so
those a
crazy.
lot of those symptoms went away. And then she ended up moving out of Florida. She was like, I'm out. And she moved to
Wow.
Texas. And so now she's getting a resurgence of these things. And now she thinks she's got mold and MARCoNS again. And she's like, I said, listen, start clearing that, start doing that protocol
Yeah,
again
you
because
just have to
that worked.
get back on the nasal protocol. Yeah, it works. It works. That's why I started doing it because I had one guy came to me, this big strapping, it's like a builder kind of guy. So if I get migraines from histamine foods, just from histamine foods, I'm like, what's your job? And he's like, I clean air conditioning. I'm like, oh my God. Right? So I like he was my first guy. I was like, because this test is like it's like $400 test, like
Yes.
I'm just not gonna tell everyone to do it. I'm like, can you do it? He's like, he did it, full of MARCoNS. We used the nasal spray within like, I don't know, 3 weeks of using the nasal spray, he can eat histamine foods.
No. So what's in your
Totally.
nasal spray? Like, what are you using? Are we
Oh,
allowed to know that?
we use it's a commercial product called Exlia. It's actually got xylitol in it that breaks down biofilm. So we use that. It's got a bit of grapefruit seed extract, but we're not using it for grapefruit seed. We're using it for the xylitol. And then we mix it with colloidal silver, iodine, and sea salt.
Really? And so is
Yeah.
this a product that's already been made or you make it?
No, you have to make it up yourself. Yeah. But people, yeah, look, some people find it a bit uncomfortable for a while. Most people will tolerate it well, and it's very efficacious. So this guy, the air conditioning cleaning guy, he can't quit. It's his own business, right? He's got a proper mask now. And when he feels like it's building up, he uses the nasal spray and it clears it again. So he just has to live with it. Like, and he doesn't get
Hmm.
any of the other mass. He's not getting MCAS from mold. It's just because his exposure is so all the time, right?
Right.
So MCAS is going to cause way more problems, like multiple food intolerances, multiple chemical sensitivities, like gut issues, fatigue, right? He's just
Yeah.
has to deal with this in his day-to-day life.
Right. Right.
And then women with the hormonal migraines, I just am always going, yeah, I understand it's estrogen, but what's estrogen doing to histamine? It's increasing histamine in the brain. But why is your histamine in the brain so high in the first place?
Exactly.
And then we
And
can
so
have
it
a
could be
whole,
MARCoNS.
and then we can have a whole chat about methylation. And I know I get people on my YouTube disputing this all the time, but I see patients, I'm a clinician. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I'm just like grassroots. I see people
Yes.
all the time. Methylation breaks down histamine in the brain, and you can have a genetic mutation on histamine and methyltransferase enzyme. And people are saying it's due to genetic mutation on HNMT. I'm like, whatever, you might have a mutation on HNMT, but it doesn't mean that it's expressing. And
Hmm.
there's something that's really building up your histamine in the brain. It's not a gene. And what do you do with a gene? It's just not helpful. And what happens when you take methyls to break down histamine without treating the cause? You can get massive adverse reactions because it's breaking it down super fast. So say you've got MARCoNS in your nose and all this histamine being released, and you take methylfolate, methyl B12 or SAMe to break down histamine, it will often come out as a banging headache, a migraine, anxiety, insomnia, a worsening of your symptoms. Often.
Yep. As happens to me.
Sometimes people are like, oh my God, it worked. I'm like, wow, like you're lucky. Because it kind of makes sense that that would work, but clinically, it usually makes people way worse because you're not actually addressing the cause. And when people say it's genetic mutation, like it's clinically, I'm like, it's not, because you take the cofactor for that enzyme, SAMe, it should work. If it's just genetic, you
Right.
provide the cofactor for that enzyme, you get it working, it should work, and it very rarely does. Very rarely.
That's been my experience
That's
with
exactly right.
people, other people, and myself and my family members.
Yeah. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
never give methyls to anyone with high histamine ever. Because it can, well, migraines is all it can cause panic attack, suicidal ideation, really bad, like severe anxiety, really severe symptoms. So I'm really careful with them. Really
Wow.
careful. Yeah.
And then
So
so you have to just kind of, it's more moving up that ladder and going, okay, what's above that, which is could be the MARCoNS or could
yeah.
be
And
okay.
just super, you know, with your issue and the family history, it's like potentially a lot of estrogen. It can just be like the estrogen dominant picture with some complex mix of genetics and environment. Um, and then also there's just, but I would definitely be looking at issues like yours with mold exposure, MARCoNS, and just having a think about what is actually causing this build up of you're sort of increasing your histamine bucket in your brain before your hormones
Mm-hmm.
change.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I definitely think about.
Yeah. Oh, this is so fascinating to me. Like, I love it. And I hope everybody else is on the edge of their chair like I am and is much of a nerd. Because it's just, I love how you keep digging and you're pulling back these layers. And it's not just like, we're just going to throw this at you and see if it sticks. And, oh, you've got a methyl problem. Let's just give you methylated bees. And there's so many people that react to that
Yeah, I
and that
learned
don't
that.
feel well.
No, I learned that when I first started as a naturopath. because I was lucky. I went to work
Wow.
in a clinic that specializes in methylation, and we saw all this. And I saw firsthand how methyls can make people, um, well, it was the depression, anxiety, and people calling up suicidal. And I'm like, I can't, I'm not dealing, well, what I can't.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have to work around this. And then I just worked around it and I worked out how to do it in a more sustainable way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when people come to me on methyls, I always say, when did you start? Do you feel better on them? Are you sure? Okay, it's increased your energy, but do you think it's made your eczema worse? Has it made your acne worse? Has it given you more migraines? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Really?
Mm-hmm.
I'm making absolute sure that because I hardly ever prescribe them because I really don't think most people need them. And I've had
Okay.
people that think that they need them, but we just deal with the underlying issues and then they run out of them and they stop them and like, oh, actually, I don't need them.
Right.
It's just,
Yeah.
I'm not a heavy prescriber of them at all. Yeah. So
Good to
when it
know.
comes to methylation, I'm
Mm-hmm.
just looking at all the things that I see clinically that increase histamine are the common things that disrupt methylation and disrupt the absorption of your methyl donor nutrients. Like hydrochloric acid insufficiency causes
Yeah.
B12 deficiency, can cause methionine deficiency. They're methyl donors. You need those nutrients for methylation. SIBO can cause folate deficiency, right? So who cares about MTHFR? If you're not eating folate, if you're not absorbing it, you're not going to get methylfolate. Right. And then we've got oxalates cause massive issues with a pathway called the transsulfuration pathway, and it reduces your homocysteine, which you need for methylation. All
Yeah.
of those things also cause high histamine. So it's
Yeah.
very, very linked. That's why I do my practitioner training is all about how you can understand the methylation pathways with the clinical presentations and the things that your patients have that are causing histamine.
Okay.
So it's very, very linked.
So
Yeah.
in the like if you were doing Dutch testing, which is one
Mm-hmm.
of like we sell a lot of Dutch tests and I do a lot of interpreting of the Dutch test and you'll see that somebody's got really low methylation status. It's so you find that most of the time that it's something else causing that low methylation.
Well, there's something that's disrupting the methylation,
Mm-hmm.
but what you do with that information is dependent on, well, okay, this is how I look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying you need to take methyls and SAMe for phase 2 methylation of your estrogen is not adequate enough to fix someone's hormonal problem. So the thing with methylation, supporting phase 2 methylation, the conjugates of that will go into the gut and bypass through the bowels. So what if
Mm-hmm.
you've got high beta glucuronidase enzyme that's going to deconjugate those estrogens and
Mm-hmm.
recycle them back? If you're constipated, it's not going to help. Also, so many of these women with hormone imbalance are high histamine.
Mm-hmm.
And if you give methyls to high histamine women, they feel worse usually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the other thing is that um, just detoxifying estrogen via glucuronidation with
Mm-hmm.
calcium deglucarate is so helpful because the conjugates get passed through the urine system and not the gut. So I find that super helpful clinically.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Dutch test, I don't look at that Dutch test and go, you need methyls,
Okay.
just because of the way that it can cause adverse reactions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You look at that test and you have to think about the whole picture of that woman. Does
Mm-hmm.
she need progesterone? Does she,
Is
yeah.
she
So it's just,
pooping?
is she pooping? What's about
Yeah.
beta glucuronidase?
Mm-hmm.
Because it is one pathway of estrogen detoxification. One. So
Mm-hmm.
you've also got sulfation and glucuronidation, methylation. Really,
Mm-hmm.
those three. So what about the other two? You're just relying on one, giving a methyl donor. People can sort of, I don't like saying over methylate, under methylate, but people can like take all these methyls and get hyped up and stimulated. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just like dumping, what's this like pushing phase 2 and dumping estrogen into the gut? Like, what's that doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
don't
I
find it
always
clinic.
look I kind of start at the bottom and move up. And because if you see these pathways backed up, then it's like, well, if you're not pooping, that could be causing this
Absolutely.
upstream issue with
Yeah,
your estrogen.
that's right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's like I'm with estrogen, it's just like, okay, what's going on with your gut, your bowels, and what's
Hmm.
actually going on with your histamine
Hmm.
and like dealing with all of that. And I just find calcium glucarate such a great supplement clinically. It just helps, it
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. I
I just
love
use
it.
it all. I just find it really helpful,
Yeah.
useful, well tolerated.
Yes. Yeah.
And
And
then
it
and then
doesn't drain the estrogen, which for like late perimenopause, menopausal women, that's important because if they're having problems detoxing and metabolizing the estrogen, I find giving D-indolmethane, which is so common to give, makes it their estrogen drop too far. And
yes,
they don't feel well. A lot of
yeah.
women don't feel well on DIM, I
Yeah,
find.
absolutely. I
Hmm.
also think with dim works on phase one.
Hmm.
And like, what if your phase two is blocked? So,
Exactly.
so
You're
phase one
dumping.
creates highly toxic metabol estrogen. They're highly toxic estrogen metabolites until they go through phase two.
Hmm.
And my patients have big issues with phase two because not only they have methylation issues, they've got transsulfuration, they've got sulfation issues.
Okay. Yeah.
So sulfation's also phase two.
Hmm.
So I don't give DIM either. And apparently it also shunts estrogen down the four pathway, not just the two. So
Oh.
yeah, there's practitioners that I really respect in Australia have found the research on that. And I found it actually. I think I put it in my course. So we don't know if it goes down the 2 hydroxy or the four. It can go down either.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
Joanne, this is
Yes.
like life-changing information because every
Yeah.
practitioner is like loads women up with DIM
Yes.
because they'd want to take it away from the 4 hydroxylation and push it down 2 hydroxylation.
Yes, that's right. So two practitioners that I really respect stopped doing it. And I was like, I can't remember. They're friends of mine. Like I sort of send them messages and we talk about other stuff.
Hmm.
And they just, I don't know, they didn't answer that question. And then I was like, oh, what, why? And then I was doing my research for my course and I'm like, I have to know why.
Yeah.
I'll try and find it to you. I must have it
Please
somewhere.
do. I would love to see that because I am one of the few people that I'm constantly like, on Instagram, on my podcast, saying to women, please be careful with your DIM intake
Yeah.
because you'll see like pellet clinics, testosterone pellet clinics. It is routine for them to get women on DIM. It doesn't matter what, if they don't ever look at a Dutch test. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if they're perimenopausal, menopausal. It's like every single one of them is put on DIM.
Yeah. That's no way. I'm even careful with, I did this to myself when I was like in sort of like 44, 43 to 45. I was just like so estrogen dominant. Like I was just cycling. It's like I was just like had like really robust cycles. Like
Yeah.
everything was like working almost
Robust.
too just like
Yeah,
full.
yeah.
It was just like constant like and I'm like, I'm gonna take calcium glucarate, I'm gonna take heaps of it. And I took too much. And I remember I was at work, I was just sitting there depressed. I'm like,
Mm,
I am so depressed. What have I done? I've dropped my estrogen way too low.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I learned that lesson the hard way.
yeah, yeah. Calcium D will. It's not as nearly as strong, I find,
Yeah,
as DIM, but
yeah.
it will. Yeah,
I would have been
yeah.
taking 3 grams a day for 2 weeks,
Oh,
like a
wow.
lot.
Yeah. Too much. Yeah.
Yeah,
Twice the amount. Yeah.
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 So I learned that lesson. So yeah, but
Yeah.
it's interesting, it's all, but I just find with estrogen dominant women, if
Hmm.
I mean I've had some cases, honestly. I've had women with severe estrogen, severe high histamine, severe high estrogen, whereby we just dealt with the histamine in their gut and the environment, and
Hmm.
it stopped their heavy periods. It stopped the breakthrough bleeding. It we just didn't even start detoxifying their estrogen because this one girl couldn't take calcium glucarate. Do you know what calcium glucarate also detoxifies?
What?
Mold.
Testosterone. Oh,
Mold.
okay.
Yeah, mold, mycotoxins. So the glucuronidation pathway is big with mold. So this girl had massive mold
Wow.
issues. I gave her she had high beta glucuronidase enzyme in a stool test. I'm like, you need calcium deglucarate. She did not do well on that at all.
Because
So
she
we
was
had
releasing
to,
mold.
this girl had the worst histamine symptoms I've ever seen. She was really bad. She came in, it causes massive issues with regulating your body temperature. Sydney's hot in summer. She came in with like almost like a ski jacket thing on because she was freezing. She'd poop like
Oh.
12 times a day. She had severe itchy vaginal anal area, severe. She had chronic reflux, terrible hormones. It was a mess. And we just got her histamines down and it fixed so many of her hormone problems because she was a huge histamine bucket. Huge.
Huge. What
Yeah.
about the Dow enzyme? Let's talk about that because it's always seemed like the easy fix. It's like, oh, you're probably deficient in this enzyme that breaks
Yeah,
down
no.
histamine in the gut. Just take this. And
Most
then you
people are
hear
not.
exactly, you hear people taking it and they're like, yep, did not do well with that.
Okay, so firstly, I in Germany, they're so thorough with their testing and they're really into histamine in Germany and Switzerland,
Oh,
big
interesting.
time. They test down. And I see a lot of Germans patients. And I've got some German practitioners I train and in Austria as well. They're never low. They're never low. When they are, they've been low like twice and it's been mold. So if you've got a genetic mutation on Dow, it's not, it's just doesn't, it's, who cares? It's not a problem. It's not a thing. People will argue with me about that, but it's not. It's just not a thing. You have high
I
histamine
agree.
from from whatever's causing it. With Dow, how I find it helpful, how I use it is um people having they've got SIBO, right? So
Mhm.
they've got SIBO. So we fix SIBO, we got that all under control. They go on a SIBO low histamine diet. We get their bowels moving, digestive enzymes, kill off the SIBO bacteria. They do that for like 3 months. And then we start to reintroduce FODMAP foods and resistant starch. If they're doing well on that, we then start to reintroduce some histamine foods. Okay. Now, usually people are pretty good on most of them, but they sometimes are like, Joe, I just tomatoes, just, I don't know, like they send off my reflux a bit or I get a bit itchy. It's like some part of the adaptive immune system's been triggered for that food for some reason, right? It's
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
they're kind of allergic-ish to it. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yep.
Taking Dow, one Dow before you have a meal with tomato will usually work well,
Okay. Huh.
right? So the immune system's so complex, it's so complicated. You know,
So
like I do my
complicated.
best to understand. It's ridiculous. Like there's
Yeah.
scientists that just spend their entire career on one cell, right? It's
Right.
really complex. You know, it's
Yeah.
just super complicated, right? So this can happen. Or women will say to me, I will get, and this is before I started testing MARCoNS actually, I will get a headache or a migraine if I have a histamine food. Let's just say it's not related to their hormones. I get a migraine from champagne. So if you have a 2 Dow before champagne, pretty much you might be okay. Like a lot of people can do that. You can't have a bottle, you can have a glass. Yeah.
With the
So
Dow.
yeah, or some people like I've got to go. I'm going overseas, Joe. I'm going to Italy with my family, and I'm going to be eating histamines, and I need some help with that.
Yeah.
When a lot of people will say it helps when it doesn't help at all. Uh, the Dow enzyme's highly concentrated in the small bowel. When I think about Dow and food, I'm like, oh, what's going on with SIBO? So if they're taking the Dow enzyme and it's not helping that much, it's probably because they're just consuming so many FODMAPs and starch and just feeding SIBO at the same time.
Mhm.
So they're aware of histamine foods and the histamine plate might have a little bit of histamine. They take the Dow with a little bit of histamine, bit of avocado, tomato, but they're actually eating a whole lot of FODMAPs, causing a release of histamine. And then the Dow's just not enough.
Mhm. Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And you
Um,
also
yeah.
mentioned things like the another very common thing to prescribe somebody with high histamine is quercetin.
Yes. Yeah.
but
So
it's not
quercetin,
always, yeah.
yeah, the quercetin doesn't always work. We got to understand that quercetin is like a natural mast cell stabilizer, or help stabilize mast cells. But your histamine issue might not be coming from mast cells. It can come from other
Hmm.
cells.
Okay. Yeah. So that's why that one
But where
doesn't.
it's where when I learned about the that estrogen stimulates mast cell release of histamine, I do try quercetin with some of my estrogen women.
Hmm.
I don't find it that efficacious though, to be honest, but sometimes I do try it. Do you find it helps?
No.
Nope. Yeah.
It
It's a funny one.
caused a
I think I
migraine for
left,
me.
yeah, it caused a migraine.
Yeah, a lot
Wow.
of supplements do though for me.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those supplements where there's research on it, left it in my book because some people do. It's usually
Hmm.
doesn't cause adverse reactions, and some people find it beneficial. But that's
Right.
the thing. It's like, um, yeah, it is it works on mast cells. So I had a lady yesterday. She had gallbladder surgery, gallbladder removed, and then she had an
Mm.
endoscopy, and she somehow had a crazy immune reaction to the endoscopy. Like
Oh,
it's not, she's taken antibiotics, it's not an infection, but she's kind of like anaphylactic almost. And it's way, way worse at ovulation. So crazy. So I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, you got to see the allergist, but there's a mast cell component. I gave her calcium glucarate and I just got her on some quercetin just to see if it can just help gently reduce that mast cell degranulation that the estrogen is causing.
okay.
I don't know. This is like, I've never seen a case like that, but
Yeah.
I'm like, let's just try that
Yeah. Yeah.
and say. So I use it, if I think potentially there's a potential reason. Yeah. But it has
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
when there's more of a mast cell um, release of histamine
Yeah.
than other cells. Yeah.
What I have found to work the best for my histamine that has cleared up a lot of it. Like I used to always have hives in my arms, in the back of my neck. It would move. It would be like, oh, for 6 months, I'll break out at the back of my neck. And then it moved and it'd be like the back of my knee. And then it'd be under my armpits. And then it would like, it was really strange. And then I started low dose naltrexone several years
Mm.
ago. And it was about 9 months into it. And I suddenly realized I'm not, I haven't had a rash. I mean, I
Wow.
always had one. I usually seen how much cortisone cream I would use. And because it was the only thing that would get it to go away. And then avoiding my trigger foods. And I just was like, wait a sec, I've been eating all of these things that I used to react to. And
Wow.
now I haven't had a rash for months and it's continued that way. There's some things that I still can't do and I just avoid them like avocado, but other
I don't know
things
how
have
that works.
gotten better.
How does that work? Do you know?
Yeah, well, and this is what's strange is it upregulates the immune system. And I can't remember if it's which like if it's T2 or I feel like it's T2.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a certain immune pathway that it
Mm-hmm.
upregulates. And so I took it because I was reacting to heavy metal chelation. And
Oh,
and I had
wow.
read that it could help with that in that detoxification process. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll try it. And it did. It helped stabilize things so that I was gaining weight from chelation.
Mm.
And so I stopped gaining the weight. And then it helped get rid of, I had really bad tendonitis because I used to do massage for a living. And I just thought that that was going to be for the rest of my life. And so I suddenly noticed I had no more arthritic pain anymore. And then I noticed that I no longer was getting these hives all the time. And I was
Wow,
like,
that's
this is
amazing.
crazy. And so,
Yeah.
and both my mom and my sisters both find that it really helps them as well. So it's
Wow.
just
I'll have to
definitely
look into
been,
that.
it also, when you look at the research, it's excellent for healing the gut.
Wow. I mean, I know that it's used for SIBO, it's a
Yep.
prokinetic medication, but I don't know how, that's amazing. I have to look into that, how it stops hives.
I love low dose
Yeah, yeah,
naltrexone.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I love it so much because it has such a high safety profile.
Yeah, yeah, it does, doesn't
And
it?
it helps with so many things, right? Because the immune system, as we're talking about here today, can affect you in so many different ways. Like it presents itself, an altered immune system presents itself in many different ways in each person. One person might get fibromyalgia, another person gets hives and allergies.
Hmm.
And that's the other thing. Like people with severe seasonal allergies, I'll put
Mm.
them on low dose naltrexone, and it helps substantially when nothing else has helped.
Yeah,
But
okay.
if some another person, it might just be gut issues. Like there's just so many different things, joint
Mm.
pain,
Mm.
brain stuff. Like, and
Mm.
so I
It's all
think
immune. It's
that
all a huge immune. We were just
exactly,
it's just trying to keep us alive. So it just
yeah.
gets hyper stimulated.
So I think that the low dose naltrexone helps people in all these different areas because
Yeah.
that's how they're presenting an immune issue. And so it's like one
Interesting.
person's Hashimoto's numbers go down, and another person their tendonitis goes away, or whatever it
Mm.
might be, or their
So
rash, or
you have to get that from a doctor in
you
Canada?
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah, no, that's
prescription. And
interesting.
it's
I might
off
think about,
label prescription, right? Because it's
yeah.
high dose naltrexone that is typically uh, known in the medical community. It's not known the low dose naltrexone. And it was discovered because somebody that was a doctor that was giving regular high dose naltrexone to addicts, people that were addicted to drugs and alcohol. It's used in therapy to help because in high doses it blocks the opiate receptors in the brain, so that when somebody drinks or takes the drug of choice, they don't get a feel good. They don't get a payoff from it. It's just kind of
Okay.
like, meh, that's boring. And so it helps them to not want to drink or do the
Mm.
drug. And so the guy that discovered this, he realized that when he was weaning his patients down off of the naltrexone, that when it got down to the really low dosages, suddenly these people were having these miraculous like things
Wow.
happen to them because of the immune system, like autoimmune was going away, and whatever else he discovered. But then that's how low dose naltrexone, because
Wow,
it
that's
acts
fascinating.
differently. It doesn't block, it up regulates the production of the opiates somehow. So people also get, like people that are a little prone to depression or anxiety can actually have mental health improvements from taking low dose naltrexone.
Wow, that's fascinating. I do see, I've been aware that it's out there being used for many things,
Mm-hmm.
because I do see patients on it, but I just hadn't looked into it. But I have patients who do have crazy allergy symptoms that we find really hard to get under control because it's environment.
Yes.
So I need
Yeah.
to get them to go to I've got a great integrative doctor I like. Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, no, that's
There
really
you go.
helpful to
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
because there are
It's
just some people that need medication.
yeah. Yeah. And it's like I feel like it's probably a band-aid still, right? We're still not getting to maybe the root, but it
Yeah, but
sure
if the root cause
helps.
is, but if the root cause is your dog or the flowers in your neighborhood or your trees in your neighborhood, it's really hard to deal with that.
Yeah,
And it often
yeah.
is. It's often environmental allergens and it's seasonal changes, and it's just that's really hard.
Yeah, or for me, like the mist, because I used my hands so much in massage, that was not like that's something that's not going to go away,
No, no, it's
right? I can
just
maybe go
wear and
do
tear.
prolotherapy or stem cell therapy, but to for me, taking low dose naltrexone gets rid of this inflammation, and it's
Yeah.
great,
Yeah, it's great.
you know?
And I've heard it's very well because I do send people to get it as a prokinetic for SIBO.
Yeah, yeah. No, it works really well for gut problems and
Yeah,
leaky gut.
wow.
So
That's good. I just wasn't aware of the skin. That's good to know, the allergy picture. Yeah, that's good to
yeah.
know.
Yeah. Okay, well, as much as I would like to continue talking to you, it's been over an hour.
Oh, good. It's gone fast.
You're gonna have to come back for a part two, Joanne.
Oh, there's lots I can still we can talk about.
Right?
We need to talk about we absolutely need to talk about oxalates
Hmm.
properly and how it disrupts
Hmm.
sulfur metabolism and the sulfation pathway and low homocysteine and methylation.
And oxalates are found in things like spinach,
Yeah.
seafood.
No, no, they're just
No,
high.
no.
They're high in like some plant foods, But
It's mostly plant.
the human body makes oxalate.
Ah.
Yeah. Yeah, we make oxalate. So it's part of our biochemistry and we can have disruptions in that. Mold contains oxalate. Some mold
Oh,
species contain, yeah, yeah,
what?
yeah. Some mold species contain oxalate. The gut microbiome breaks down dietary oxalate. So if you've got dysbiosis, you can have problems breaking down oxalate.
Hmm.
And the human body breaks down, it's collagen. Collagen gets broken down into oxalate in complex ways, and then it needs to go through the kidney urine system. So people with kidney urine pain, vulvodynia, bladder pain, very much oxalate can be an oxalate problem.
And should
And it
not be
causes
taking collagen.
exactly. Yes. So
Wow.
so it's so the human body can make oxalate. It's common, causes people to be very unwell, major cause of fibromyalgia. Major, it depletes your sulfur. It oxalates and sulfur share the same sort of transport carrier in the body. Is a simple way of putting it.
Hmm.
They got so oxalates jump on the transport train and there's nowhere for sulfur to go, and you start dumping sulfur in the urine, you waste your sulfur. And what do you need sulfur for? Glutathione, number one,
Hmm.
to make mucin in your gut, for the sulfation pathway, detoxification pathway, many other things. So it's a
Hormone
really fascinating
detoxification.
hormone
Sulfur.
detoxification.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Hormone detoxification. And these people are very, very unwell because they've
Mm.
got often got mold and they'll have low homocysteine, because homocysteine is a storage molecule for sulfur. So the body's trying to get more sulfur. So definitely, and they are sharp little crystals and they deposit in joints and they cause havoc and chronic inflammation, chronic release of histamine. But they're just, and they disrupt methylation. So they're definitely something we'll have to talk about because people need to be highly aware of them. Do you know me? You test them on organic acids. Do you know how many organic acids at tests I see where the physician has ignored it? It's the first thing you look at. It is they destroy the mitochondria. So when you see
Mm.
those organic acids tests with all the mitochondrial markers and a lot of oxidative stress and high oxalate, it's usually the oxalates causing it. Low glutathione, low homocysteine. They are it's my thing, right? For people, it's complex, it's hard to treat clinically, but these are the people that come to me that are just so sick and it's so heartbreaking. And to be honest, they've I'm just going to say the doctors have
Hmm.
tested these tests and they don't know what to do with them and they ignore it. They don't even look at it. And these people have
Wow.
had, I'm like, when did you do your, oh, I did an organic acid test 5 years ago. And I bring it up and they've got oxalate problem and and that's their problem.
You're kidding. I
Yeah.
have
So
not
I'm
done
on
an
the
organic
bandwagon of
acids.
oxalates because it's
Okay.
actually, when you look at organic acids, if there's oxalate problem, you absolutely stop there and you really need to fix that. Really, because
So
it
would you
disrupts
say
it
that
just
that's like the first test somebody should get if they suspect histamine problems?
not necessarily. It would probably be, it depends if it's, I would send them for SIBO testing.
Hmm.
If I think it's SIBO. I go through questions to determine if I think
Right.
they've got an oxalate problem or if they've had mold exposure. But
Okay.
absolutely, one thing I need to say, large bowel dysbiosis, having histamine producing bacteria in the large bowel, very, very, very rarely correlates with symptoms. And trying to fix that doesn't give you good clinical outcomes. Truly. There is lots of research that those histamine produce. There is a lot of histamine producing bacteria that can occur in the small intestine, Citrobacter, Klebsiella, some of them. If you just try and kill those off, it's usually not the cause of that person's histamine issue. It's usually something else. 100% all the
So
time.
that's for people with SIBO or
No,
suspect of
large
SIBO?
bowel, large bowel. So if you do a
Large
stool,
bowel.
because
Yeah.
SIBO is a breath test, but if you do a
Yes.
stool test and you
Yeah.
can see you've got all of these histamine producing bacteria, a lot of practitioners are just trying to kill those off, grow your
Hmm.
good, doesn't correlate with any good clinical outcome. It really doesn't. So it's usually coming from something else. It's coming from mold. It's coming from oxalates. It's coming from estrogen. It's coming from
Okay.
MARCoNS. It's coming from SIBO. It's coming from something else, honestly. So I
Oh,
rarely do
this is
stool testing.
complicated.
I
You rarely do
Yes,
stool testing. Okay.
yeah.
So scrap the GI
Organic.
map.
It's all a big cost, right? So SIBO
Hmm.
and organic acids.
Okay. So
Yeah.
if you don't have typical symptoms of SIBO, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
no digestive issues, then you would
Yeah.
go, okay, let's start with the organic
Yeah.
acids.
Yeah. And oxalate. So oxalates often they cause it's a laundry list of symptoms. But these people are often quite unstable. It's like they kind of find it hard to answer questions directly. It's weird.
Oh,
It's like sometimes because you can dump oxalates and get rid of them. So they will often have pain symptoms though. Joint pain, they've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, bladder pain, gut pain, fatigue. Because it depletes sulfur, they have big issues with like glutathione, and they'll have multiple chemical sensitivities. Yeah,
right.
because they're just
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and raised lymph nodes and things like malaise symptoms, like cold and flu-like symptoms without actually getting a cold or a flu. And then big histamine issues as well. It's kind of like a process. I go through a process of elimination in my mind
Mm-hmm.
around this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm like, do you, and if you have SIBO and an oxalate problem, that doing that diet, doing SIBO low histamine low oxalate's difficult.
Oh my gosh.
Treating
What
oxalate
would you
will usually,
eat?
yeah, treating oxalate will usually be the priority.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it causes it depletes you. This is the thing with that oats test. What if something's depleting your glutathione? You need glutathione for everything. It's just that. It's like because it actually depletes your glutathione. So where do you
Wow.
even start? Like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So anyway, we
Oh,
can do a
so
whole
confusing.
yeah, sorry. We can do a whole podcast on that because it's people we really need to understand. And if they ask their physician to do an organic acids
Mhm.
test, the Mosaic Labs one's the best. Used to be
Okay.
Great Plains, it's Mosaic.
Okay.
And if they have had one done in the past, pull it out and look for oxalates because it's often just ignored. And if you're
I
still
think I can
unwell,
test for that. I think yeah, I have access to test for organic acids. So
yeah, I'm sure you
I'm going to
can.
do one. I've never done one.
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting test.
Yeah. In the
Yeah.
MARCoN one, you have to do in a clinic, right? You have to get a swab in the nose.
Oh, you can get there's a lab in the US, um, microtoxology, I think it's called. That you can buy them online. I think you
Oh,
need a
okay.
practitioner. I think you need a
Right.
practitioner. So look, to be honest, my patients, I've said, can you just order this test from, it's called microbiology lab or something, and they call them up and say, can I just order the test? And they let them.
Microbiology dress.
Microtoxology.
Okay.
Oh, microtoxicity.
So to kind
If you
of,
just Google, so if you're for your listeners, if you just Google MARCoNS testing United States, it'll come up.
oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So just to kind of, because we've talked about so many very deep topics here today. And I know we could have probably, this is like, we could do 10 podcasts in this one, and all the things that we've
There's a
talked
lot.
about. Uh, I think just could we wrap it up like, okay, if if you're connecting with what we're talking about and you're going, I am experiencing a lot of what they are talking about here today, then you would basically, I think, take your course, first of all.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like, let's talk about that because people are going to be
Yeah.
like, well, how can I work with Joanne? Because she's clearly the expert on this. And you do offer coaching worldwide. So
I
you
do.
have a practitioners program, which I think is excellent. We have a lot of practitioners that listen to this podcast. So you have a practitioners course for people that want to learn like a really can the
Yeah.
general public also take that one or no?
No, this one's
No,
for
it's
practitioners. It's a
very
group
specific.
coaching.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's very specific. Look, it's the students haven't found it too hard, but it's for practitioners and there's group
Okay.
coaching that goes with that. So that's available in the information. I'm doing it by application. There's a application form on my website. And I've also got a course for patients. Now, this course is meaty and it's got lots of slides and you print them off and you learn. It
Hmm.
has treatment options so you can understand the treatments that you can do, the testing that you can do. It's all there, but it's thorough with education. It's educational in nature as well,
which
which
people want nowadays.
I'm obsessed with it because my patients often record the Zoom and they want to learn, but this is slides and it's all written out. And you can print it off. You can learn. There's diagrams. There's just everything there, and you can keep it forever to really understand the root causes of your problems, so that you can go to your doctor and talk about it. You can go to your nutritionist and naturopath that you love, that's helped you with so many other things, but they're just missing this link. And
Hmm.
then you can ask for the tests to be done. You can have a conversation with them about it. Obviously, you can work with me one-on-one as well, but it's educational in nature so that you really understand what's going on with you, because
Hmm.
naturopathy is not a passive thing. It's not like
Hmm.
going to the acupuncturist where you just get pinned and then you leave.
Hmm.
You have to take responsibility and you be your own advocate for your own health. And so
Yeah.
that's why I've done that practitioner course. So it's available for sale on my website. I've got a payment plan as well. So the patient course, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so and we cover all the major causes of high histamine and the treatment options, the testing, so that
Which
you can,
it would just, if somebody is relating, I would highly recommend this, because trying to piece together this kind of information is hard. It's hard for me, and I'm a practitioner. And so, as a
yeah,
patient that's dealing with a lot of this stuff, rather than trying to like piece all this information, like at least it's all in one place. And then you have actionable steps of, hey, this is what you're going to do to clear this out. If
exactly.
this is, and if this doesn't work, then it might be this. And yeah, I can really appreciate that, because going online and trying to read about histamine intolerance, which I did for about a year solid, and then literally shut the door on it and walked away. And I was like, this is stupid. I can't even, no, because I just read that you get rid of histamine, high histamine foods. That's what everybody said. And then I
Yeah,
started to read from these other blogs of people that did this for long periods of time that just got worse.
exactly. It's funny. I just stumbled across this when I started working at a clinic specializing in methylation. So we understood methylation broke down histamine. So we didn't really know much else. So we're like, let's get people on a low histamine diet. But then they'd reintroduce foods and they never got better. I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm like, why? Like something's going on with the gut. And then I started researching DAO, and then I'm like, oh, DAO enzymes highly correlated in the small intestine. What's problems with the small bowel? It's SIBO.
People.
And then I'm like, that's a problem. And then I started more and more histamine patients. And then it's like, oh, there's an oxalate problem, there's a mold problem. Oh my God, this estrogen's a really big thing. So it's funny because I've never had histamine issues myself. It was
Hmm.
never, and I never learned about it at uni. It just came to me. It was for some reason, it became in my awareness. And because it's so clinically relevant, you can't ignore it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, so that's why I spent my it's research based, the course, but it's also clinical pearls of wisdom. And that's what you need. You
Yeah.
need you need someone to say, don't take methyls when you got high histamine. Because it
Yeah.
makes sense to take them. Oh, it breaks down histamine, I'll take methyls. Like, no, it makes you worse often. So
Well,
so
and
it's
that's such a
just,
great piece for me to learn, because if I have people that don't do well with, they show low methylation on their Dutch test, and I say take a methyl B, and they're like, I don't feel good when I take that. Now I'm gonna know why.
yeah, it's often you ask them the symptoms, it's often a
Yeah.
histamine symptom.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
really interesting. Yeah, so I put, the course is, yeah, it's on my website. And obviously, I actually do offer 20% off initial consults with me for anyone that's purchased the course, because some people need a practitioner as well. And then
Yep.
there are other people that have their practitioner, they're working with someone overseas and they just need the piece of the puzzle. What I find is people, so many women are into natural medicine. But they just don't have the time or the inclination to study. And this is fascinating stuff to a lot of people as well. So if you're
Yeah.
interested in this stuff, it's fascinating, and especially if it's happening to you or your child or your husband or your mother, it's fascinating to learn. I mean, we think it's fascinating, but I think
Yeah.
the people that listen to us think it's fascinating as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
so too.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
it's easy to understand, but it's quite meaty, and you can really get your teeth into it. Yeah.
I find I always worry with my audience, my podcast audience, when I do these really in-depth podcast interviews with smarty pants like yourself. And I worry, I'm like, oh no, is this gonna like, is everybody gonna be like, whoa, that went over my head, forget about it, you know? Every time I have one, I get reports. People will write into me, they'll message me on Facebook or Instagram, and they'll say, wow, that was such a great interview.
Yeah.
I had to
People
listen
like,
to it multiple times with a pen and paper.
yeah.
And they love it.
Yeah, they love
They
it.
want to learn. They're like,
Yeah.
yes, like
Yeah,
I
that's
want the
what,
in-depth stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what my little video on my sales page for the Histamine Masterclass says. You print it off and pen and paper and you write and you
Yeah.
learn. And that's how, and
Yeah.
it's, when you learn, there's auditory and there's visual, but there's nothing like writing down.
Hmm.
I mean, I
Hmm.
remember at uni, I loved just write things out. If you write things out, you really do learn,
Yeah. It's the
and
same with
then,
me.
and
Yeah.
exactly. So they're
Yeah.
all the slides are there for people to print off, and then you've
Yeah.
got the content forever.
Yeah.
Um, Actually,
And
there's a
you've
free,
got a good YouTube too, which we should mention. So you've got a great YouTube channel with lots of information and little videos about all of this. And so if you want to
yeah,
get more
yeah,
information from Joanne, I'm going to link to
it's on
all of this in
YouTube.
the show notes. I'll link to her course, everything that
Yeah,
you guys need,
thank
so you
you.
can check it
Yeah,
out. And when I have
I'm
her
on Instagram
back,
too. Yeah. I do now and then I do live like webinars as well. So I usually promote those on Instagram. So you
okay,
can follow me on Instagram as well. But there's just lots of content I'm trying to create so that people can really start to heal, because it's just not well managed histamine out there in the world. I know that. It's just
it's
not.
not.
Which is why I
No.
decided to specialize in it. I'm like,
Yeah.
I need to do this. There's a market for it. I understand it. So it really is, it's just, this course is without misinformation and mistakes.
Yeah.
There's so much misinformation and mistakes. And let's face it, you can be anyone and get on social media and say you do anything in any industry without actually being qualified.
Yes.
So that's a problem. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I can assure you that the knowledge in the course will really help people and guide you away from so many people. It's just they go down rabbit holes of doing the wrong testing and doing the wrong things, and
And
it just
wasting so
costs them
much money.
wasting so much money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just all in one place for
Yeah.
people to learn. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Oh,
Well,
thanks,
thank you so
Karen.
much for coming on the show. I'm so glad I said
Pleasure.
yes
Oh God, me
to the
too.
the millions of proposals I get for coming on my show. I'm like, no, I have a feeling about this one. I want her on
Thank
my
you.
show. So I'm
Thank you
really
so
happy
much,
that we
Karen.
met, and we'll continue to be connected, I'm sure. And I'll have you back again on the show. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Karen.